So last week we talked about natural light, setting your master clock so your body knows when to be awake and when to be alert and when it's time to start these internal repair processes at night. So now that hopefully you've played around with this a little bit, maybe you've also already seen some changes. The next thing we need to talk about is what we're putting into that system. So if you think that light is like the clock, then food is the fuel. Kind of makes sense. But I want to move away from that idea of calories. Calories are just energy units. Food is actually information, it's signaling. Every bite you take is a signal to your mitochondria, to your gut bacteria, and your hormones. And if you're fueling with noise, processed foods, chemicals, inflammatory oils, your body really can't hear those signals you're sending through your circadian rhythm. So today we're going to be talking about food first as like a foundational metabolic strategy. So, most of the health industry talks about food in terms of calories and macros. And while that's it's a valid strategy, I kind of want you to move away from that or thinking entirely about that. I really want you to think about food more as information or signal, like I already mentioned. Every molecule of food that you ingest and then also absorb sends signals to your cells, to your DNA. So when you eat nutrient dense meals, you are sending a signal to your mitochondria, those little powerhouses in your cells that make all the energy, that it's time to produce some energy and it's time to repair some tissues and it's time maybe to balance hormones. When you eat a lot of processed food that lacks nutrients, then you're essentially feeding your body just static instead of clear signals. It's like trying to run a high performance engine on cheap fuel. Eventually it'll stall out. And that's literally the biggest mistake that I see in my practice is people trying to fix their health with dozens of expensive supplements, to boost their mitochondrial function and get more ATP energy. And while their foundation is built on nutrient poor soil, literally, it sounds cliche, but you cannot out supplement a foundation that is fundamentally deficient. If you're not getting the building blocks from your food, you're just making, well, really expensive poop. So when we talk about food, we have to also talk about sourcing. When you consume that non-organic produce, you often end up also consuming residues of herbicides, for example, like glyphosate. And those can act as endocrine disruptors. They literally mimic or block your hormones. And they can also exert stress on the microbiome that can damage then your gut lining by extension. But we also need to consider nutrient density. The food that somebody grows can only be as healthy as the soil that it was grown in. So if the soil is already nutrient depleted, then the food is not going to have the same amount of nutrients that it did 20 years ago. So essentially, it's not as nutrient dense as you would expect it to be. The other thing with these chemicals is, they can be silent immune triggers that can keep your system in a state of, low grade inflammation. And all of this also creates a heavy liver burden. Your phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification pathways are supposed to be cleaning up your own metabolic waste. But instead, now they're busy, they're forced to spend their time on their limited resources scrubbing the pesticides out of your system. Now, I know organic can be quite expensive, but if you have access to a farmer's market, it can be a really great source for, both meat and produce. Many farmers and producers, they don't actually carry the USDA organic designation because they're small growers. They don't have the funding to go through all the certification process, which is very expensive to get certified. So if you can go to a farmer's market and you can talk to the farmer what their growing practices actually are, they may be growing organic food but not labeling it because legally they're not allowed to. And you also can meet some nice people that way, get some community going. Now, if you're not near a farmer's market, then you can focus on the EWG, the Environmental Working Groups, 30 dozen and the Clean 15. So you want to prioritize buying organic for the 30 dozen because those are the ones that typically have the highest pesticide residue. Oftentimes you'll see fruits on there like strawberries, for example. They tend to be on there pretty much every year. And then you can save money on the Clean 15 because, typically they're root vegetables. They don't have as many pesticides sprayed on them directly on the part that you eat. And so that would be a way where you could minimize the immune load on your body and maximize your budget, so to speak. So what does a food first lifestyle actually look like? And it comes down to these 5 foundations. The first one is hydration and electrolytes. You aren't just drinking water, you're actually fueling the electrical grid of your cells. We are electrical beings and we have to have electrolytes to conduct that electricity. So if your minerals are off, then your cells can't efficiently or effectively communicate with each other. Of course, the second one is going to be quality proteins, and these are literally the building blocks for everything in the body. Without sufficient bioavailable amino acids, your tissue repair, including the repair of your gut lining, it just comes to a screeching halt. The third are healthy fats, and these are crucial because they form the membranes of your cells, of your mitochondria. They're essential for brain tissue. 60% of the brain consists of fat. So they really serve as the raw material also for your hormones, and they're crucial for gallbladder function. So if you eat a low-fat diet, then you're literally starving your endocrine system and you're also affecting your digestion. And then the fourth one is seasonal and local produce. This is really about nutrient diversity. Our bodies, they thrive when we eat within the season because it aligns with our intake. It aligns our intake with the natural cycle of nutrients that are also available in the soil as they change throughout the seasons. And then, of course, there's got to be a big no, and that's the non-negotiable part, really. And that's the processed seed oils and the refined sugars. These are a huge source of inflammation in the modern diet, and they are signal jammers that I mentioned earlier. So if you're building your foundation with these 5 things, you're really setting yourself up for success. And I want to address the elephant in the room. I see so many people spending hundreds of dollars a month on supplements, hoping that this one will fix the fatigue or the bloating or the skin issues. But the truth is that supplements cannot fix a broken foundation. I already mentioned it earlier. When you eat a whole real food diet, you get this whole complex synergistic package of cofactors and minerals and phytonutrients that you just cannot replicate that in the pill. And that really is what your body recognizes and needs and knows how to use. So when you bypass food and go straight to supplements, you're missing, that internal intelligence that your body already has on how to do things. And then, of course, digestion is your ultimate gatekeeper. If your gut lining is inflamed or your stomach acid is low or your bile flow is sluggish, which we'll talk about all that later in the series, you aren't absorbing those supplements. You're just paying for very expensive food. And so we always want to prioritize the food first and ensure that the body actually has the capacity to utilize what we give it. Now, I'm not against supplements. They can be very useful, but the foundations have to be in place for them to actually be of service to you. So, so I already mentioned digestion. We can't talk about food without also at least touch on that a little bit today, because it's, it's just a critical part of that process. And so you can eat the most clean, organic, nutrient dense food on the planet, but if you're not actually digesting and absorbing it, you're not getting those nutrients. So it's digestion really starts with that cephalic phase. That's your nervous system signal that happens before you even take a bite. And you all have experienced that. Maybe you thought about something yummy that you really like and your mouth starts watering. That's the cephalic phase working. And so if you're stressed or you're eating on the go or you're distracted, you're really not triggering that phase, and your body is not in the proper mind or state of mind or in the proper state of the nervous system to actually break down that food. And from there, then we have stomach acid. This is your protein breakdown gatekeeper. And if it's low, you aren't getting your amino acids, and you're leaving the door open for pathogens to survive in your stomach and also reach your gut, which can then cause gut infections, SIBO, those kinds of things. Of course, then comes the gallbladder and the bile that gets released. And bile is really an emulsifier. It breaks down fats, and it helps absorb fat soluble vitamins, and also is the primary way the body takes out the trash. So it affects motility and your detox. So very important. So the bottom line really is you can't build your body with what you haven't broken down. So if you aren't absorbing your food, you're starving at a cellular level. So you're starving even though you're well fed, regardless of how much you eat. But we'll talk about that more deeply going forward. So how do you actually start? Well, we don't want to overcomplicate it, but first thing you want to do is audit your fats. So if you have canola or soybean or vegetable oil or corn oil in your pantry, you'd probably want to take another look at it and tell it goodbye. They're typically already oxidized by the time they even get to your house, and they're just a huge inflammatory burden. So you can swap them for butter and tallow or ghee or olive oil, coconut oil, even avocado oil. Avocado oil is really good for high heat cooking, for what it's worth. The next thing is prioritize protein at breakfast, because this is like the most effective way to stabilize your blood sugar for the entire day. So it sets the tone for your metabolism for the entire day going forward. And then third, you can use this template, and I'll post that in the group later. But every time you eat, check your plate. Do you have a quality protein? Do you have healthy fat? Do you have some fiber, fresh vegetables or cooked vegetables? And that's the combination that keeps your blood sugar from spiking and crashing. You see there's a little bit of starch on there, but these are going to be smart carbohydrates, like sweet potatoes and broccoli and those kinds of things, root vegetables. And then lastly, you want to mineralize your water. I already mentioned how important electrolytes are. So when you drink plain water that's, stripped of electrolytes, the stuff that you buy at Kroger's in the small bottles, you can actually leach minerals out of your body. So all you got to do is add a pinch of red sea salt or some other electrolyte mix, and that turns it into electrolyte solution that your body's actually able to absorb. And so those are just the small daily shifts that can really help you get started on that healing journey. So that's the food first framework. So we've covered why sourcing matters, how to use the EWG guides to protect your liver, and how to fix your daily plate with balance.